My name is Maya Thompson, Black American, and for 16 years I believed I had the perfect marriage. We lived in a 2-story brick house on a quiet street in Atlanta, Georgia, with a white fence and a maple tree that dropped red leaves all over the yard in the fall. People walking their dogs would slow down, look at our porch swing and the flowers I kept in blue pots, and smile like they were looking at a picture in a magazine. To the outside world, I was the lucky woman with the steady husband, the warm home, and the easy life. I believed it too, most days. I baked pies for neighbors, took casseroles to church events, and posted holiday pictures of us in front of the fireplace, our smiles lined up like proof that everything was fine. Daniel Carter, my husband, was a calm man with a soft voice and a careful way of moving, as if he never wanted to disturb the air around him. He worked at a financial firm downtown, leaving early in a blazer and polished shoes, coming home late with his tie loosened and his eyes tired. He would kiss my cheek, ask about my day, and listen while I talked about new recipes, annoying clients, or my sister's drama. He never raised his voice. He never slammed a door. When I looked at our life on paper, it seemed solid. We had a good house, money in the bank, and enough saved for small vacations to beaches and mountain cabins. Love to me was stability, and Daniel gave me that. Or at least that's what I thought. The morning he died started like any other ordinary weekday. The alarm buzzed at 6 o'clock a.m., and I rolled over to nudge him. His side of the bed was warm, but he didn't move. I pressed my hand to his shoulder and shook him gently, then harder. Daniel, I whispered, then said his name again, louder. Something in me froze when I saw his face. His eyes were half open, staring at nothing, his lips slightly parted, his skin to still. Time pulled away from me then. I remember dialing 911 with clumsy fingers, remember the paramedics rushing in, their shoes thudding against the hardwood floor I had polished the day before, remember one of them saying the words heart attack and too late in a voice that sounded far away. All I could really hear was the echo of my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the soft, flat beeping of a machine that wasn't picking up anything at all. The days that followed blurred together. People flowed in and out of the house like waves, bringing food I couldn't taste and hugging me with arms that felt both comforting and heavy. I nodded. I thanked them. I said, yes, he was a good man, over and over again until the words felt like lines from a script I hadn't chosen. The funeral was held in a small chapel in Savannah, a place Daniel's parents loved. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and polished wood. I sat in the front row in a black dress that didn't feel like mine, staring at the closed casket up front. Every time someone stood to speak about Daniel's kindness, his work ethic, his loyalty, I felt something twist tighter inside my chest. Grief, I told myself, just grief. But even in that fog, small things began to feel wrong. My sister Rachel kept pulling me aside between people's condolences, her perfume too strong, her lipstick too bright for a day like that. She looked excited in a way I didn't understand, eyes glittering as if she had news to share instead of a brother-in-law to mourn. Maya, she whispered, leaning close so no one else could hear, Daniel promised me some money. Alone. He said he'd help me with a business idea. Did he talk to you about it? I frowned, my brain struggling to catch up. What are you talking about, Rachel? She sighed, impatient, like I was being slow. It was a lot, around $40,000. He said once he got everything straight at work, he'd transfer it. Maybe he left something in his papers? You'll check, right? Her words felt like sand under my tongue. My husband's coffin was not 10 feet away, and my sister was already counting money that did not exist in my world. Not today, I told her, my voice low and flat. We'll see, Rachel. Not today. Later, as the crowd thinned and people began drifting toward the parking lot, I noticed someone standing near the back of the chapel, almost pressed against the wall. He was young, maybe in his late teens or early 20s, tall and a little awkward, with his hands shoved deep into his pockets as if he was trying to hold himself together. He watched me with a look I couldn't read: sadness, fear, or maybe guilt. When our eyes met, he flinched, half lifted his hand like he wanted to wave or come forward, then dropped it and turned away. Before I could move toward him, he slipped out the side door and was gone. I told myself he was just another co-worker or someone Daniel helped once, but the way he looked at me stayed with me all evening, like a question I hadn't answered. That night, when the house was finally empty and the dishwasher hummed softly in the kitchen, I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed. The bedroom felt too big without Daniel's steady presence. His side of the bed was untouched, his glasses still lying on the nightstand, his watch coiled neatly beside them. I lay back and stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. Grief settled over me like a heavy blanket, but there was something else under it, something thinner and sharper, doubt, maybe, or a feeling that I was standing at the edge of a story I didn't fully know. I tried to push it away, telling myself I was just tired and hurt, that my mind was looking for patterns where there were none. My gaze drifted back to Daniel's nightstand. On top of it, next to his watch, lay a small silver key. I knew that key well. It belonged to his study, the one room in the house he kept strictly off limits. He called it his work cave, a place where he said he needed total focus. He had installed a lock himself, joking about how even his wife couldn't be trusted not to snoop through his spreadsheets. I had laughed back then, told him I didn't care about his boring numbers. For 16 years, I treated that locked door like a harmless boundary, a sign of privacy in a long marriage. I never pushed, never asked. I thought that made me a trusting wife. I picked up the key now and rolled it between my fingers. It was warm from the bedside lamp, smooth and light, nothing like the weight it carried in my mind. I realized how strange it really was that a man I shared a bed with needed a locked room in his own house, a room I had never once stepped into. Trust, I suddenly understood, shouldn't need metal and a turning lock to survive. If it did, maybe it wasn't trust at all, just ignorance dressed up as loyalty. That thought frightened me, because it meant there might be versions of my life I hadn't seen, truths I had walked past every single day. I didn't open the study door that night. I was too tired and too raw, and the idea of finding anything unexpected felt like more than I could bear. Instead, I lay awake until the first light of dawn crept in around the curtains. The key stayed in my hand the whole time, resting against my palm like a tiny, silent question. I thought of Rachel's hungry whisper about money, the strange young man at the back of the chapel, the way Daniel had started working later and later over the last few years, always saying something about pressure at the firm and just a bit more time. I thought about his sudden heart attack, the way he had never once mentioned feeling sick. A picture of our life sat in my mind, and for the first time, the edges didn't quite fit. When the sky finally turned pale and the city outside our windows began to wake up, I pushed off the blanket and swung my feet to the floor. My legs felt weak, but some stubborn part of me had slid into place during the night. I couldn't keep living inside the version of my marriage I had held in my head, not when there were so many shadows I hadn't dared to look into. Holding the key so tight it pressed into my skin, I walked down the hallway toward the study. The house was quiet, the kind of deep quiet that makes every sound louder. The floor creaked under my bare feet. The air felt cooler near that door, or maybe that was just my nerves turning every small detail into a sign. The study door waited at the end of the hall, smooth and plain, the paint around the lock chipped from years of use. I stood there for a long moment, my heart knocking hard against my ribs. This door had always been part of the background of my life, something I passed without thinking while carrying laundry or vacuuming. Now it was the only thing I could see. I raised my hand, slid the key into the lock, and felt the small resistance of metal against metal. My fingers trembled, but I didn't pull back. Whatever was on the other side, I needed to know. Carefully, slowly, I turned the key. The door opened with a soft, tired click, like it had been holding its breath for years. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my hand still on the knob, my heart beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Daniel's study was smaller than I had imagined, a square room at the end of the hall, yet it seemed to hold more air than the rest of the house. It smelled like old paper, leather, and the faint trace of his cologne that had sunk into the curtains and the chair cushions. For a second, the scent almost broke me. I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself, because all I could think was, he was just here. A big wooden desk sat under the window, the same dark oak I remembered seeing delivered years ago, when he told me it was just for work. Folders were stacked on top of it in a neat, almost painfully careful order. Pens sat in a polished cup, lined up in a row, all pointing the same way. The bookshelves along one wall were crammed with law books, finance guides, and thick binders with labels I didn't understand. Mixed in between were travel books, their spines worn and faded. I saw titles about road trips across America, guides to hidden towns along the East Coast, and glossy books about cities in Europe I had only seen on television. At first glance, the room looked like any serious home office. If I had walked in as a stranger, I might have thought Daniel was just a hardworking man who liked to read and plan trips he'd never take. But I knew him, or I thought I did. And there was something under the surface of this room that didn't match the quiet, controlled husband I had lived beside for 16 years. The air felt charged, like a secret was hiding in the corners, waiting for me to notice it. I stepped fully inside and closed the door behind me, shutting out the rest of the house. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I ran my fingers along the edge of the desk, then pulled open drawers one by one. Inside, I found nothing more than office supplies, a few old receipts, and some carefully folded notes from clients. Everything was too clean, too empty, like someone had packed away the real story and left only the props. My frustration grew with every drawer I closed. I hadn't come in here for paperclips and pens. I had come in for the truth. As I moved around the desk to check the bookshelf, something on the wall behind the desk caught my eye. Just above where the wood met the paint, there was a small, thin scratch. It might have been nothing, just a scrape from moving furniture, but my heart sped up anyway. I leaned closer, tracing the line with my fingertip. It didn't feel random. It felt like the edge of something. I pressed my hand against the wall and pushed the desk a few inches away, grunting at the weight. As the desk slid aside, the scratch stretched into a longer line, then into a faint but clear seam, forming a narrow rectangle. It was a hidden panel. My hands started to shake. I told myself it could still be something simple, an old storage space, maybe, or a strange design choice. But deep down, I knew better. Daniel had kept this room locked for a reason, and now I was standing in front of a door inside the door. I felt along the edge, my fingers searching for a catch or a switch. A small metal latch clicked under my thumb. The sound was quiet, but it seemed to echo through the room. Slowly, I pulled the panel open. Behind it was a narrow gap inside the wall, just wide enough to hold a few shelves. They were packed, stacked there, like a life folded and stored away, were photos, documents, and maps. The sight of them hit me harder than any spoken confession could have. This was not just a work stash. This was a second world, one my husband had built and then hidden from me. I slid down to the floor and reached for the closest bundle of photos, my knees touching the cool wood. The first picture was of Daniel. His arm was around a woman I had never seen before. She was younger than me, with smooth brown skin and warm eyes that seemed to shine even in the flat print of the photograph. Her smile was wide and easy, the kind that said she trusted the person beside her. Next to them stood a teenage boy, lanky and slightly awkward, with Daniel's chin and Daniel's eyes. They were standing in front of a small blue house with peeling paint and a crooked porch railing. On the bottom corner of the photo, I saw a street sign I didn't recognize, but on the back, in Daniel's neat handwriting, were the words, Vanessa Brooks and Jordan Family Trip, Charlotte, North Carolina. The word family blurred as my eyes filled with tears. My hands wanted to let go of the photo, to drop it back into the dark space and close the panel forever, but I couldn't. I was rooted there, forced to look. My husband's face in the picture was different from the one I knew. He looked relaxed, almost playful, his smile wider than the polite one he wore at office parties or church potlucks. The woman leaned into him like she had every right to. The boy stood close, shoulders turned toward Daniel as if he were the center of that little universe. I grabbed another photo. There they were again, this time standing in a park in Chicago, Illinois. The boy held a dripping ice cream cone, laughing at something Daniel was saying. Vanessa tilted her head back in laughter too. Behind them, I could see tall buildings and a wide stretch of grass. Another picture showed them at some sunny beach in Florida, hair blown by the wind, sand at their feet, a half-finished sandcastle between them. In every shot, Daniel looked lighter, freer, like a man who had set something heavy down. Jealousy, grief, and betrayal twisted together inside me until I could hardly breathe. My mind jumped back through the years, searching for signs I had missed. The business trips that had popped up suddenly, the extra hours, the tired smile when he came home. I put a shaking hand over my mouth, swallowing a sob. How many nights had I fallen asleep alone while he was out there living a second life, taking pictures with his other family? How could he stand in front of our fireplace for holiday photos with me, knowing he had those other photos? He had known he was dying, and he never told me. He had gone to appointments in another city, met with doctors, read these words, and then come home and told me he was just tired from work. I thought back to the times I had urged him to get a checkup, and he had brushed me off with a smile. Maybe he had already gone. Maybe he had decided I didn't need to know. I didn't know which hurt more, the fact that he had kept his illness from me, or the growing feeling that he had been planning for a future that didn't have me in it. The room started to feel smaller, the walls inching closer. I pressed my hand against my chest and took a few slow breaths, trying to steady myself. I was still kneeling on the floor, photos and papers spread around me, when I heard a soft creak from the hallway, like a weight shifting on one of the old floorboards. My head snapped up. "Hello," I called, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. The doorway filled with a shadow, then with a shape, and the young man from the funeral stepped into view. Up close, I could see him clearly for the first time. His hair was cropped short, his jaw tight, his eyes were red, either from crying or from lack of sleep, and his hands were trembling at his sides. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, raising his hands a little, like he didn't want me to be scared. I didn't mean to scare you. Who are you?" I managed. The question came out more like a breath than a voice. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping for a moment to the photos scattered on the floor, then lifting back to my face. "My name is Jordan Brooks," he said. I think we need to talk about Daniel Carter." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. "You were at the funeral," I said, the memory snapping into focus. "Standing in the back. Why didn't you say anything then?" He stepped one foot into the room, then another, as if he half expected me to push him out. "I tried," he said. "I wanted to, but your sister kept watching me. She wouldn't stop." I got scared and left. My throat tightened at the mention of Rachel, but I pushed that aside for later. I gestured weakly toward the photos. "You knew my husband?" He looked down at the pictures again, his eyes lingering on Daniel's face and then on Vanessa's. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady, like this was a sentence he had practiced many times. "He was my father." The word father hit me harder than any storm. I stared at him, then at the photos, then at the open panel in the wall. The life I thought I had built in this house, this marriage, this home, this history cracked all the way through in that moment. On the other side of that crack was something twisted and complicated. A truth that didn't care how hard I had tried to be a good wife. For the first time in 16 years, I realized my story with Daniel had never really been just mine. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight from the Atlanta morning pouring over our faces like it didn't know my life had just cracked in half. The coffee I'd made sat untouched between us, cooling in the mugs. Jordan kept both hands wrapped around his cup, but he didn't drink either. For a while we just sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock above the stove. It was strange, sharing such an ordinary room with someone who had just changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. He was the one who finally spoke. He didn't look at me right away. His eyes stayed on the wood grain of the table, following the lines with a distant focus. He told me his mother's name was Vanessa Brooks and that she had met Daniel years before I ever knew him. Daniel had helped her buy a modest house in Charlotte, had visited often back then, and had sent money every month. He told her he'd always take care of us, Jordan said, his voice steady but low. He said it like a promise. For a long time, I believed him. I listened as he talked about childhood memories that felt like a mirror image of my own, just shifted a few inches to the side. He remembered Daniel bringing small gifts, sharing inside jokes with his mother, teaching him how to throw a ball in a quiet backyard. Then, when he was around 10, the visits had slowed down. Daniel came up with more excuses. Work was busy, travel was hard. By the time Jordan turned 16, the trips stopped altogether. He still sent money for a while, Jordan said. Then even that started getting irregular. The word sounded too formal coming from someone so young, but I knew he'd had to grow up fast. When he reached the part about his mother's car crash near Jacksonville, Florida, his voice finally cracked. He stared down at his hands as if the story were written there. "It was late," he said. "Rainy. They said she lost control. Daniel called me once after it happened. He sounded scared. He told me again that he'd take care of me, that he'd fix things in his will. But after that call, I could never reach him. He stopped answering." That was 2 years ago. I felt anger rise in me, hot and sharp, not just as a wife but as a woman listening to another woman's life being treated like something disposable. "Did you ever meet my sister?" I asked, because the question had been tugging at me since I saw Rachel's number in Daniel's phone last month, listed under some work excuse. He nodded slowly. "Once, Daniel brought her with him on a trip to New York City. He said it was a business trip and he had to drag her along because she was in the middle of something. She came to the house my mom and I were renting then. She looked at my mom like she was something stuck to her shoe, like she was in the way. After that visit, Daniel started pulling back more. Mom said your sister was dangerous in a way that didn't show on her face. A cold line of fear ran down my spine. I thought about Rachel at the funeral, pressing me about money before Daniel was even in the ground, her eyes too bright, her voice too eager. Pieces of her behavior over the years slid into a new, uglier pattern. I couldn't see the whole picture yet, but I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. We went back to the study together, to the hidden panel in the wall behind Daniel's desk. The photos and reports were still scattered on the floor where I'd left them, little islands of another life. We moved more slowly this time, working side by side. Jordan sifted through envelopes with his mother's name on them, tracing the letters like they might disappear. I dug deeper into the box at the bottom of the panel and found a thick folder with no label on the front, just a paperclip holding several pages together. Inside was a draft of an unfinished will. My breath caught as I scanned the lines. Daniel had left me the house and certain accounts I knew about, but there was more. He had written about a trust for Jordan, a long-term fund meant to support him, and another trust set aside for any unborn child. The words felt clinical, but I knew there was something human and messy hiding underneath them. My hands shook, but I kept reading. At the bottom of the will was a short handwritten note, squeezed into the margin in Daniel's familiar neat script. Final instructions in office vault. Code linked to sapphire necklace. My hand flew to my throat by instinct. I still wore the sapphire necklace Daniel had given me on our 10th anniversary, a delicate silver chain with a dark blue stone I had once thought of as proof of his love for me. I unclasped it and turned it over. On the back of the pendant, so tiny I had never noticed before, were numbers etched into the metal. For 1912. Our anniversary date. His office vault, I whispered. At his firm downtown. Jordan looked up. Do you think they'll let you in there? That's the thing about being a widow, I said, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. People suddenly forget how to tell you no, and I'm not going alone. I glanced at him. We'll bring a lawyer. Later that day, Jordan and I walked into Daniel's office building, a tall glass structure that reflected the sky back at itself. I had been there before for holiday parties and once for a charity event, but I had never gone past the lobby by myself. The receptionist recognized me immediately and softened her voice, offering condolences. My legs felt oddly steady as we rode the elevator up to Daniel's floor, the hum of the machinery matching the low roar in my ears. His nameplate still hung on the door. Daniel Carter, partner. I stared at it for a heartbeat, then pushed the door open. Inside, the office looked like it always had sleek, organized, professional. His partner, Marcus Hale, stood by the window, talking to someone on his phone. When he saw us, he ended the call too quickly and shoved the device into his pocket. Maya, he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm so sorry for your loss. His gaze slid to Jordan and lingered there, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. And you are here with me, I said before Jordan could answer. I need to access Daniel's private vault. It's about his will. Marcus's expression shifted, a small crack forming in the smooth mask he'd put on. The vault is sensitive, he began. Firm property. It would be best if we waited until everything is formally reviewed. There are procedures, legal supervision, that sort of thing. I already called legal supervision. I cut in. He's on his way up now. As if on cue, the door opened and my lawyer, Samuel Reed, stepped inside. Samuel was a quiet man with thoughtful eyes and a reputation for being relentless in court. He had known Daniel for years, had handled some of our earlier paperwork, and when I called him that morning and said, I think there are things my husband didn't tell me, he didn't hesitate. Now he gave me a small nod and turned to Marcus. With my client's consent, Samuel said, his tone polite but firm, we'll open the vault now. Given the circumstances and the mention in this draft will, he held up a copy. It would be unwise to delay. Marcus hesitated, weighing something in his mind, then finally gave a sharp nod. Fine, but I want it noted that the firm is not responsible for any misinterpretation of. We'll note everything, Samuel replied. Let's proceed. The vault was in a side room, a large metal unit embedded into the wall behind a framed picture. The code, when I entered the numbers from the necklace, unlocked it with a heavy mechanical thud. Inside were stacks of binders, boxes of documents, and several digital drives labeled with dates and innocuous terms like client review and quarterly summary. It didn't take long before the labels stopped matching what lay inside. We found records of illegal accounts, money routed through shell companies, transfers that jumped from one bank to another like a trail of footprints trying to disguise themselves. Some of the money was tucked away in small banks scattered across America. Other sums sat overseas, including one account in London with over £120,000 in it, and another in New York with more than $600,000 parked neatly under a generic corporate name. My stomach twisted as I realized how far this all went, how much of Daniel's calm, respectable life had been built on hidden dirt. Then Samuel opened a folder filled with printed emails. He read silently for a moment, his jaw tightening. "You need to see this," he said, handing them to me. The messages were between Daniel, Marcus, and a man named Victor Lang, someone I had never heard of. They talked about cleaning funds, keeping regulators quiet, and making sure Vanessa never talked. I felt cold all over as I read one line from Marcus. "If she keeps pushing, we will have to handle it. Rachel says she'll help keep things in line." My own sister's name sat there in black ink, right in the middle of their secrets. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I thought of her bright eyes at the funeral, her insistence about the money Daniel had supposedly promised her, the way she had always managed to be near the center of any storm without ever looking wet. Now I saw her in a new light, not just as the jealous younger sister, but as someone who had her hands, and maybe her conscience, deep in something ugly. Samuel gathered the most important documents and made copies on a portable scanner he had brought along. "This is serious crime," he said quietly, slipping the copies into a secure folder. "Money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, maybe more. We'll secure everything off-site. For now, don't talk about this with anyone you don't absolutely trust." That night, the threats began. The first came as a phone call from an unknown number just after dark. I was standing in the living room, staring at a stack of papers on the coffee table, when my cell phone buzzed. I answered without thinking, my mind still on bank codes and account names. "Mrs. Carter," a deep voice said. It was smooth but cold, like ice over deep water. "You need to walk away from Daniel's records. They're not your concern. You already got the house." "Who is this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I felt. "Someone giving you a chance to keep your life simple," he replied. "Stop digging, and we won't have a problem." He hung up before I could say anything else. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding, then set it down like it was something that might explode. Minutes later, I heard the soft slide of paper under the front door. I went to the entryway and picked up a folded note. In plain, blocky letters, it read, "Stop digging, or you'll lose more than money." I looked through the window beside the door and saw a black car idling down the street, engine running. A man sat in the driver's seat, his face half hidden by shadow, but something about his stillness made my skin crawl. I didn't know for sure, but I guessed he was Victor Lang or someone working for him. He didn't get out. He just watched the house like it was a problem he was deciding how to solve. I locked every door and window in the house, checking them twice. Jordan slept in the guest room that night, after arguing that he should be the one on the couch near the door. I told him no, I was done letting men decide where I belonged. I sat on the couch with a baseball bat in my hands and my phone beside me, staring at the front door as the streetlights cast long shadows across the rug. Every sound made me flinch: the wind against the siding, a car passing by, the old pipes knocking in the walls. But what came the next day was worse than any car outside, worse than any threat on cheap paper. In the afternoon, Samuel arrived at the house with a USB drive in his hand and a grave look on his face. He took off his coat slowly, like it weighed more than cloth and buttons. "We found something else in the vault," he said. "A video Daniel recorded a few weeks before he died." He held up the drive, the small piece of plastic and metal catching the light. "Maya, you have to see it." When Samuel plugged the USB drive into my laptop, the living room felt smaller than it ever had. The curtains were closed, shutting out the Atlanta sun. The house was quiet in that heavy way that makes every tiny sound stand out: the soft whir of the ceiling fan, the distant hum of a car passing outside, Jordan shifting his weight on the couch beside me. I folded my hands in my lap so Samuel wouldn't see them shaking. He clicked on the video file, and after a brief pause, Daniel's face filled the screen. He was sitting at his desk in the study, the same desk I had searched not long before. The camera angle was slightly low, like he had propped his phone up on a stack of books. There were gray shadows under his eyes, and a tiredness I had never really noticed when he was alive. Or maybe I had just refused to see it. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the calm, confident shell he wore in public. For a moment, I felt a sharp stab of grief. Then he opened his mouth, and the world I thought I knew tilted again. "If you're watching this, Maya," he began, his voice rough, "it means I'm gone, and I didn't fix what I broke." My chest tightened so much I had to remind myself to breathe. I could feel Samuel's presence to my left, solid and still, and Jordan's to my right, tense as a held breath. But my eyes stayed glued to the screen. Daniel talked about Vanessa and Jordan. He spoke slowly, like each word hurt. He said he had been a coward, too afraid to tell me the truth, too greedy to walk away from the money Marcus and Victor moved through their firm. He admitted he let the second life grow because it fed his ego to be needed in two worlds, to be important to two families. Hearing him say it out loud was like watching a stranger speak with my husband's face. Then his tone changed, grew colder, more focused. "Rachel found out everything," he said. "She knew about Vanessa. She knew about the accounts. She threatened to expose me if I didn't cut Vanessa off and give her a share of the money. She also wanted a child with me. She said that would bind our futures." My skin crawled so hard I almost scratched at my arms. I thought of my sister's bright smile, her sharp comments, the way she always leaned too close to my life, like she was trying to step into it. I had defended her for years, brushed off her selfish choices as hard times and bad luck. Hearing Daniel say she had used my marriage as a bargaining chip made something inside me twist and snap. He looked straight into the camera then, and for a moment, it felt like he was looking straight through the screen at me. "When Vanessa died in that crash near Jacksonville," he said, "I saw messages on Rachel's phone. She had been tracking Vanessa's routes, telling Victor when she drove home alone at night. I can't prove she made that crash happen, but I believe she did." Jordan made a soft, broken sound beside me, and I reached for his hand without thinking. He gripped my fingers so hard it hurt, but I didn't pull away. On the screen, Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Rachel is pregnant with my child," he said quietly. "I've set up a trust that she can't touch. The money goes to the child only, and Samuel will manage it. If anything happens to that child, the money will go to Jordan instead." The room felt like it was spinning slowly, even though everything around me was still. Daniel went on to talk about the illegal money, the accounts in America and Europe, the way he had watched everything spin out of control but never fully stepped away. Then his voice began to shake. "Maya," he said, "I am so sorry. I loved you in my way, but I lied to you every day. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you would leave me, and I deserve that. I hope that after all this, you choose yourself, not my shame." The video ended abruptly, the screen going dark. For a long moment, no one moved. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, feel the burn of tears I refused to let fall. I wasn't going to break down in front of the two people who had just watched my husband confess to wrecking my life. "I need to see Rachel," I said finally. My voice sounded calm and flat, like I was making a grocery list. Samuel nodded slowly. "If you confront her, be careful. She's involved with dangerous people. Don't go alone. Don't stay long. Tell her what you know and leave." He glanced at Jordan. "We'll handle the legal side. The evidence is strong. The accounts, the emails, this video, it's enough to bring in federal agents. But this part, the one that had my sister's name in the middle of it, felt like mine to handle." Rachel had moved to New Orleans, Louisiana, a year earlier, chasing what she called a fresh start and what I suspected was another half-broken dream. I drove there alone in my sedan, a small suitcase in the trunk, the flash drive with Daniel's video in my purse, and a knot of cold resolve in my stomach. The road blurred under me, miles of highway passing in a gray ribbon, but my mind stayed clear. I thought about Rachel as a little girl, hiding under my bed during thunderstorms, clutching my arms so tightly her nails dug into my skin. I thought about her at the funeral, smiling through her fake sympathy while asking about money. Somewhere between Atlanta and New Orleans, I let the past version of her go. Her rental house sat on a noisy street, paint peeling, balcony railing rusted. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, her smile appeared automatically, but it froze before it could settle. She took in my expression, the tight set of my jaw, the way I was gripping my bag strap. "Maya," she said, forcing a lightness into her voice. "You didn't call first." "I didn't need to," I answered, stepping past her into the living room. She smelled like perfume and stale coffee. The room was cluttered with cheap furniture and shopping bags. A half-empty wine glass sat on the coffee table, next to an unpaid electricity bill. We argued. It started with questions and slid into accusations quickly. She denied everything at first: Vanessa, the threats, the connection to Marcus and Victor. She laughed too loudly, called me paranoid, said grief was making me imagine things. Then I pulled the flash drive from my bag and held it up between us. Daniel told everything, I said. On video, your messages, your deal with Marcus and Victor, your plan to use that baby for money. Her face went white in a way I had never seen before. The mask slipped. For a moment, I could see the panic underneath, the fear that someone else finally had the upper hand. You can't prove I did anything to that woman, she hissed. They'll never pin that on me. I never touched her car. Maybe not, I said. Maybe the law can't attach your hands to the crash, but the money for your child is locked in a trust you can't touch. Samuel will protect it. The police will see the money trail, the messages, the calls. I won't protect you. Not this time. Her expression flickered, shifting between anger, fear, and something almost like pleading. For a heartbeat, I saw the little sister who used to cling to me. Then I saw the woman who had looked at my life like it was a door she had a right to walk through, even if she had to break it down. I'm leaving, Rachel, I said quietly. You can live with what you did. I already had to live with what Daniel did. I walked out of that house and did not look back. The sound of the door closing behind me felt final in a way nothing else had. On the drive back, I didn't cry. There was no room left for tears. I felt hollow, but that hollowness wasn't empty, it was space. Space where something new could grow. In the weeks that followed, everything moved both too fast and too slow. Samuel turned the evidence over to federal agents. Investigators came to my house in Atlanta, asked careful questions, took copies of documents, watched Daniel's video with the kind of still faces that told me they were used to seeing the worst in people. Marcus and Victor were questioned, then arrested. The accounts in Europe and America were frozen, strings of numbers turned into locked doors. Not all the money was dirty. A portion of what they recovered was clean, earnings Daniel hadn't twisted into something else. Over $300,000 was placed into legal trusts, one for Jordan and one for Rachel's unborn child. The terms were strict. Rachel couldn't touch the funds. She could not move them, borrow against them, or use them as leverage. For the first time, the future of that child and of Jordan wasn't tied to anyone's lies but was protected by law instead of promises. As for me, I sold the house in Atlanta. The brick walls, the maple tree, the white fence, they had all become part of a story I was no longer willing to live inside. I packed one suitcase with clothes and a few small things that still felt like mine. My father's old Bible, my favorite mixing bowl, a framed picture of myself before Daniel, standing on a pier with the wind in my hair. Everything else I let go. I moved to a small apartment near the beach in Sarasota, Florida. The rent was reasonable, the building quiet. The first night I fell asleep to the sound of waves instead of the hum of traffic. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen and fried food from the boardwalk. I started a new baking business, selling pies and cakes from a small stall not far from the water. Tourists paid in crumpled dollars, complimented my crust, told me my key lime pie reminded them of summers they missed. I went home every evening with flour on my shirt and a light ache in my feet, and for the first time in a long time, the tiredness felt clean. Sometimes when the sun is setting and the sky over Florida turns pink and gold, I sit on the sand and think about the woman I used to be in that house in Atlanta. The wife who believed everything was fine because she was told it was. The woman who walked past a locked door for 16 years and called it trust. I don't hate her. She did the best she could with what she believed. But I am not her anymore. I am the woman who opened the locked door. The woman who sat on a study floor and picked up every shard of truth with her bare hands. The woman who chose her own life over someone else's lies. I didn't leave as the betrayed wife. I left as the woman who survived every lie and wrote the rest of her story herself.